Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Louis, and this is our live bi-monthly webcast, and we're taping here from Primadrola Ashram in Laguna Hills, California. Thank you for joining us, and for those of you who are new, first time with us, thank you and welcome. Willkommen. Alrighty, I'm going to start today with some toning. Clear out the pipes, ground, anchor, center. And you folks can just breathe in the sound vibrations and just have yourself a nice prana bath as we go through this. In fact, I might even use my magical bells too, my Tibetan bells. Okay, here we go. Opens the crown. And now it's Miller time. No, just kidding. A few hours away from that. All right. Few questions. Thank you for sending them in, folks. Keep them coming. Very, very grateful. Tonight, our first question asks, can an enlightened being become unenlightened? Can an avatar fall from grace and go back into fear consciousness? You speak a lot about the disease of complacency, but I wonder if there is a state of enlightenment from where you cannot fall back into ordinary human fear-based consciousness. It's actually not one question, it's a complexity of questions, though they are interrelated. So I will cover them all. Can an enlightened being become unenlightened? The answer is bing, bing, bing. No, you cannot become unenlightened. Can an avatar fall from grace and go back into fear consciousness? That's actually two questions. Any being can fall from grace. That's a poetic phrase, meaning ones who choose to step out of. Can we please turn off phones and ringers and buzzers, whoever phones are on? Any human being, including an avatar, can choose to step outside the continuum of unconditional love and make choices or words. It is simply less likely in the case of an avatar because they are divine incarnations, but is it possible? Yes. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a more tangible definition of fall from grace. That's a little too lofty and poetic. Can an avatar move back into fear-based consciousness? No. An avatar would not live in fear-based consciousness because an avatar is only partially human. They're divine incarnations. So you could not go back into living in fear consciousness. However, can any human being, avatar or otherwise, have an experience, a moment of fear? Yes. Anyone can have any kind of experience, the same way any master or avatar can have a moment of an outburst of anger. However, that is less likely to stick to one's ribs or to pull someone into that because of their vibration and their consciousness and just who they are and what they know and how their what level their evolution is. There's a very famous story. I might have been in Autobiography of a Yogi. I'm not sure, but I mean, I've had exposure to many of Yogananda's books, so I'm not sure which one I saw this in. But he talks about, this was long after his enlightenment, when his master sent him to America to bring his ministry there. And on the boat over, he, number one, vomited over the side of the boat because he was had so much anxiety and fear and of the unknown and what it would be like. And at the time, if memory serves me correctly, and I believe it does, he did not even speak English at the time. He's like, I'm going to a country that does not speak Hindi or any of the other Indian dialects and languages. So he talks about, well after enlightenment and quite a divine being, about vomiting over the side. He also told a story about one time when he was to move through a fear when a lion materialized in his room, in his bedroom. I forget where he was, but a real lion with its mouth agape and fangs ready to bury into his face or head. And it was a test for him to move through fear. I had a similar story to that. It wasn't a lion, but actually I did have one with a lion. But actually Yogananda's might have been a tiger. It was a tiger or a lion. I had one with a lion, not quite like that. And I had another one with an off-planet entity, an ET, and it was a similar type of thing, and it got more and more severe and more violent and vehement until I finally broke through the other side of the fear, became dread, became terror. My heart was pounding, and I actually thought I was going to die, and then I broke through the other side, and the whole thing just dissolved. There's a whole story to that for another day, perhaps. So, yes, people can have, any being can, enlightened, unenlightened, master, avatar, can have a moment of anger, a moment of fear. But an avatar cannot go back in becoming an avatar or master cannot become unenlightened once enlightened, and nor can an avatar be living as in constancy in a fear-based consciousness. Is there a state of enlightenment from where you cannot fall back into ordinary human fear-based consciousness? Well, I think I've already answered that. An enlightened being does not ever become unenlightened. Moments of fear or anger, yes. Okay, our next question is in the same category somewhat. Is an avatar a god, a person, or both at the same time? And then the addendum to that question is, was Jesus Christ an avatar? An avatar is, you said, is it God, person, or both? The answer is both. An avatar is fully human and fully divine. It's a divine incarnation. And was Jesus an avatar? Yes, he was. Now, there's a lot of argument and discrepancy on that subject, but he was. And while we're on that subject of avatars, contrary to some myths and some confusion people have, all avatars are not born fully God-realized. In fact, it almost never exists. It's only happened a couple of times in human history. And granted, I don't know of all the avatars who have incarnated, but I only know of two in my lifetime who were born fully realized, and one was Sai Baba and one was Anandamayi Ma. Avatars, because they're divine incarnations, they, like all beings, have a mission. They have a plan and a mission, and part of that is to model the Adam Kadmon for humanity, the divinely perfected human, so that humans can follow their example and their lead and their teachings and perfect and purify themselves to be embodiments of unconditional love. And for that very reason, most of them, almost every single one, chooses, before incarnating, to incarnate into the full human spectrum and then go through the process of liberating themselves so that they can model the path and the journey for others, and so that it will build faith in people that they can do it. It's for that reason that very few of them just fall from the sky on fiery chariots, because it actually deepens the polarity, widens the polarity, and deepens separation. And that was a difficulty Sai Baba had most of his life. He and I used to talk about it. He used to say to me, my divinity blinds people to my humanity, and your humanity blinds people to your divinity. He said, we're opposite poles of the same, opposite sides of the same coin. People would see the spectacle of his embodiment, the miracles he would perform and the manifestations, and while it would build their faith, Satya Sai Baba's embodiment's primary mission was to build faith in a wayward humanity that had lost its way. And so he lavished the planet with a spectacle that had perhaps never been seen before. And it was for the very purpose of building faith, the believability that God exists and God is among us and you're not alone and the divine is real. And he, for those who had the privilege as well as the pleasure of being exposed to his life and embodiment, much less if they were lucky enough to meet him, he succeeded in that unequivocally. At the same time, the cost of that is that people deepen in their separation and their unworthiness because they idolatrize and deify and put him up there and hold themselves as low, even though he, like Jesus, like all the great ones have said, Jesus used to say, greater works than these shall all ye do, but people just polarize themselves and say, well, if you're that, you are that, and I could never be that, and then they distance themselves. So, but he understood that. That wasn't his mission. His mission was to build faith in wayward humanity, and that was succeeded and beyond all expectation. And so there you have it. All right, next one. I have read from another master's teaching that a great love for God can absolve or remove much karma from a person. Is this true, and why does this occur? Well, there are many paths of yoga, and bhakti is the Sanskrit word for devotion. Bhakti is the highest path of yoga, which is devotion. Because what devotion does, devotion, whether it's to God, to guru, to a master, to a deity, to whatever, the act of devotion is the highest path, the fastest path to God, because it is the fastest and most successful vehicle to attain the exalted state of self-love. We objectify and project outside of us all aspects of ourself to integrate and become whole. So the act of devotion, and this is why the guru tradition, of being with, studying with, and walking with and serving masters has been so treasured, and the world still barely has touched it in terms of the masses. I know a lot of New Age teachers say that era has ended, but it actually hasn't really begun yet. But the reason it has existed is because it is the highest path. That path of devotion is the highest, fastest, most powerful vehicle to become self-love, which is the journey to God realization. The falling in love with oneself as God, as pure love, is the process itself to God realization, and devotion is the highest and quickest path to that. So that's one of the reasons why it can remove a lot of karma. Also, because devotion, if it's pure, involves selflessness. And selflessness is the definition of humility, and humility is one of the highest, most divine character traits. And so that selfless act of pure and true devotion to another being or to the divine itself, is an act of selflessness, which is an act of humility, which then is also very, very accelerating and purifying. And paradoxically, it's the last bastion for the human mind and consciousness to conquer, it is the act of surrender, because it is the most direct and powerful challenge to the human ego, the separate ego personality, whose mission statement is, don't tell me what to do. I will never subject to another being. I will never obey. I will never serve. I will never surrender. I'll do what I want, when I want, how I want it. It's the mission statement of the ego. Therefore, this is why the path of devotion is the least popular of all the paths in the world. And it's also why people find it so difficult to obey and to surrender. And there's that built-in defiance in the human psyche. It's because of that polarized, dualistic nature that's built into the mantle of separation of don't tell me what to do, the mission statement of the ego. And so therefore, when someone goes against the grain of that and does the exact opposite, there's a tremendous acceleration. And yes, as the person asking the question said, potential for transmutation of karma for all the reasons I stated. Good question. Thank you for that. All righty. Next one, we're getting to some theology here now, some organized religion. My theology lecturer argues that when one has a spiritual experience, it should refer to the authority of the Bible. Now, my own personal experiences with God don't match those that are written about in the Bible. Does this mean that my experiences are wrong, or that they come from darkness? If a priest tells me there's something wrong with my spiritual experience, what should I do? Okay, well, first of all, anyone who knows me knows that I never teach and never have. I don't use the words good and bad, right and wrong, better or worse, things like that. Particularly right and wrong are just that's a big no-no. So it's the wrong road to go down, so to speak. There's no net gain that comes once you get into that type of argument. And in terms of that, using that same vernacular, in terms of right and wrong, it's never about what's right and what's wrong. It's about what's right for you. The thing that might serve your highest good might not serve the highest good of the person next to you, and it might not serve your highest good a week from today. So it's really being in that discernment and that inner listening and that meditating and that asking, how may I serve you, Lord, and does this serve my highest good? And be in that inner quest of what is right for you, what is your right use of will, and what serves your highest good. Now, in terms of theology professor saying that all spiritual experiences should refer to the authority of the Bible, well, clearly this theology professor is basking in or attuned to Christianity that's his or her, network and bastion and field of devotion and expertise, but it's not the only one. There are many paths that lead to the top of that mountain of God or God consciousness. And no religions are better or worse than any others, and they all came from the same place. They all came from the same pearls of truth and love. And all the world's structured religions have a certain amount of distortion, every single one. There is not an organized religion that does not have a certain level of distortion or inaccuracy, regardless of whence they came. And the reasons for that are many. Some of those reasons are translation, interpretation, competition, greed, editing, the changing cultures and norms of the time, like words and verbiage that was used in ancient times of old has different meaning or is no longer used. And nowadays, so there are all kinds of things that happened, politics, societal influences, all things that have happened over time. Competition, I think I said that one, that have tainted to some degree. But if you took all the world's religions and put each of them in a pot of boiling water for an hour, at the end of that hour, you'd have the same pearls of truth and love in the bottom of them. So they all have something to offer. And it's really important for people. This is a particular pitfall for people who leave organized religion when they have spiritual awakenings and they get into whether it's the Theosophical movement or metaphysics or whatever it is. And then they have a tendency, many, if not most, have a tendency to then judge and condemn organized religions that they have since left, which, of course, as we know, is hypocritical and anything but God-centered. So, it's important to allow everyone the freedom to choose their own path and their own journey and love and respect that. Especially something that you might have been on for years. It's really hypocritical and very small to condemn someone else's choices if they're following their heart and doing what resonates with them. Remember, water seeks its own level. And also, that the clarion call of the divine at the end of every sincere path, I wait, is the call of the beloved, the call from the beloved. So the purity of motive is what counts, the purity of intention, the eagerness and sincerity of the seeker. That's what gets one to the destination, not the road they choose or the vehicle. So, plenty of people, have been very, very devout in an organized religion and have profound experiences of God. So I want to steer this person asking the question away from the Bible's right, the Bible's wrong, this religion's right, that's wrong. Follow your own heart, and if anyone judges that, then that's that individual's problem, not yours. But by the same token, it's important for you not to judge the person judging you, because now, you're in the same boat. So I always say one of my proverbs and aphorisms is, bless everyone and everything all the time. It's a great axiom to live by. And that includes yourself. Bless yourself, bless all others, bless their choices. Don't get caught up in the smallness of, getting into a pissing contest of who's better, who's right, who's wrong, who's higher, who's lower. That's all the world of ego. That's unnecessary. Are your experiences wrong? No one's experiences are wrong. And if a priest tells you there's something wrong with your experience, what do? You just say, well, thank you for your opinion. And it's, that's your opinion. There's nothing you need to do. Now, if it's someone who is in a mentoring capacity for you, someone you have freely chosen, and you're finding yourself in constant or repetitive disagreement or conflict, then you might want to reassess that individual as a potential teacher for you. Now, in this particular case, the person asking the question is talking about a professor in a college or university. Now, that's a course that you either signed up for or are required to take, so it's a little bit of a different circumstance. You haven't taken this one on as a life mentor. But so you want to be looking at, and this is where I'm getting to digging deeper now, the question or the topic beneath your topic. Why would you magnetize a course like this? I know this individual, and we've had repeated theology questions in numerous webcasts, and so I scatter them out so we don't make a whole webcast all about religion and theology. But there has been a through line in here. There's a lot of vanity and arrogance that you have magnetized this course to flesh this out in you. So if I may be so bold, and even if I may not be, your questions are laced with arrogance, vanity, and superiority, which you are now projecting onto your theology professor, who is simply standing at the front of the room, earning a salary and trying to teach young adults about the world of religion and the world of God as he knows it, as he studied it, and becomes somewhat of an expert in his field. So you're the one bearing the judgments here, and you're getting a lot of flack back from him because of your own spiritual arrogance, superiority, and condemnation and judgment of him and of organized religion. So I think you need to drink from that cup more than he does. Let's just remove the word think. You do need to drink from that cup. All right. So be grateful for the experience and let it humble you. Where he stands is between him and God. His life and journey is none of your business. So take the medicine thyself and strive to become more humble, more non-judgmental, and more accepting of other people's choices in their lives. And then this theology course will have served you greatly. It's way bigger than Bible study. There's a course within the course that you've been mostly missing. You've been 90% focused on theology when you need to be 90% focused on the course you're really taking, which is about humility, non-judgment, acceptance, and unconditional love, under the disguise of theology. All righty. Moving on. Louix, can you please talk about the state of politics in the world from the divine's perspective, and how best we can use these examples to better ourselves? In my country of Australia, there is a lot of smallness, greed, selfishness, and drama going on in our government right now, in our federal government. Well, I'm sure you'll find, I'm not an expert on the 200-something countries of the world, but those qualities or lack thereof you're describing are existing all over the world right now, and in large measure, and not restricted to the world of politics. You'll find that in everywhere. It's in every facet of society and individual life as well. That old expression, it's always the darkest hour before the dawn. We're moving into the age of enlightenment, the age of Aquarius, and the beginning of the next, we're in the throes of the beginning of the next golden age. So we're leaving the Kali Yuga, this long, long age of darkness. So these things are seemingly at their very, very zenith as individual and collective consciousness is grappling and fighting with every breath to hold on to these antiquated, outdated, outmoded ways of being that are of darkness. And as the light continues to reclaim dominion of this planet, there's this seeming war of battle of holding on to that old when a new vibration and frequency is grabbing hold of the planet. So there's quite a storm going on. So I would rather not sit down and nitpick about individuals by name, which is a place that sadly many people like to go. And people do it in general too, If someone doesn't like the state of affairs, they'll want to blame the president or the king or the prime minister, the premier, for everything wrong in the government. And anyone with a brain cell knows, even one molecule of a brain cell knows that it takes more than one person to run an entire country. Maybe there could be some exception to that with dictators and tyrants, but for normal structured governments that you're describing, there's a whole, it's a field of consciousness that runs the country, and that is elected to some degree, directly or indirectly, by the people. So the government in place reflects the collective consciousness of the people. And it's important to maintain perspective of that rather than blaming individuals. We can look here. I'm sitting here in the United States, and there's the whole war going on about, pro-Trump versus anti-Trump, who's for him, who's against him, who likes him, his strengths, his weaknesses, his this, is that. And yet very few people want to look at the collective consciousness, look at the evolution of humanity, much less, the most important area, look at themselves. What does what you see on TV and in the news tell you and teach you about yourself? It's all about the power of one. The finger pointing is just as bad as the lethargy of sitting around waiting for something to happen. Who's going to do this and who's going to change that? You. You're the only one on the planet. So it's really about adopting "it's all up to me" consciousness. I've seen people complaining about trash and pollution, throwing trash in the street while they're complaining about it. That's how high the ignorance is and the projection, and the change happens through the power of one. So if there's something you don't see in the world, change that in yourself. Examine, where do I throw trash? And there might be ways that you pollute that you don't even think are polluting, or you're just not aware of it. If it was brought to your awareness, you'd say, "Oh my God, I can't believe I've been doing that for years." How much food do you throw away after a meal? While people are, eating feces in Africa and eating dirt pies in Haiti. They're feeding their kids dirt, and they're picking corn out of the cow manure. And how many people get up from a restaurant and throw away 30% of their meal, order way more than they can eat? How many people let food rot in their refrigerators? I see people around me physically in my own ashram do that constantly on a daily basis. Buy food, and then let it rot in the fridge when there are people dying in the street of starvation and mothers holding their babies and watching them die in their arms. That makes blood squirt out of the middle of my eyeballs, and it brings a pain in my heart that is indescribable. And yet people do it with reckless abandon and with great glee in their hearts, think nothing of it. I would cut the tongue out of my head before I would throw food away like that. So those types of crimes against humanity are what create on those, and that's an individual thing. One tiny thing, it's not tiny, but one act by one person in one moment. You multiply that times how many billion people on the planet are doing that? That's what creates the crap you see in the news. It starts by the one, because the one is not one, it's 2 million, it's 2 billion people doing that. If you looked at the number of people who don't finish their meals or order more than they can or let food rot in their fridge, we're talking about in the billions of people. Now, flip side, how many people are starving in the world? It's almost the same exact number. Fancy that. How is that so? See how it works, folks? And it'd probably come down to almost the same exact number. The number of people starving is perhaps equal, if not exactly equal, to the number of people wasting food on the planet. So, are you one of them? Look and see. Now, go category by category. Rather than sitting here and spending half your day criticizing whoever. I mean, you're talking about Australia, I was talking about the US, but there are countries all over the world, there are hundreds of countries. But people spend most of their time criticizing, complaining, but not making the changes in their own lives and seeing what they're doing that's out of integrity, that's out of alignment, that's not in accordance with the divine or divine will. And when you make the changes inside yourself, they will ripple out. Other people will see and make changes in themselves, even without seeing people change around you. And then it just, at some point hits collective critical mass, 100th monkey principle, and it changes in the world. I was with a beloved today having lunch, and we were having a conversation about the electric car and about when the Prius, which may have been the first one, I'm not sure, but it was one of the early ones, when the Toyota Prius came out, and people laughed at it and made fun of it, and it was dorky and stupid and this and that, and There were, the car only went 50 miles an hour. The charge lasted like 8 minutes. There were 3 charging stations in the whole country, so it's like it was a pointless, useless car. And yet people weren't recognizing that there were pioneers and inventors pushing the edge of civilization and of intelligence and of invention to create this. Of course, it's got to get the bugs out and it's got to catch on. But it took, not the same way it takes the pioneers to bring it into existence, it takes pioneers to go out on a limb and buy one and say, all right, I'll deal with that. I'll use it as, I won't drive very far. Or I'll use it only for small trips, or I'll just deal with the pitfalls of it, because it takes people buying it and rolling up their sleeves and getting in the game to create a momentum till it builds. And eventually, within a couple of years, there was a 1.5-year waiting list for a Prius. And then, and then eventually people started seeing how popular they were, and other automakers started. Then the electric car got snuffed out of existence as a joke and a laughingstock. And then eventually it came back bigger than ever. And now it's become, an industry standard. And it's now fossil fuels that are on the way out, even though the oil companies and the other greedy powers that be want to hold on to it to extract the last remaining droplet of oil out of the earth. That's not going to happen. And eventually, the car manufacturers don't want to retool their plants, which would cost them tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. But they will, because we won't be using fossil fuels for very much longer. They're already being phased out slowly. So eventually, the car companies aren't going to close down. They'll retool. They'll do whatever they need to do as technology changes. But it takes pioneers, and it takes a lot of courage and a lot of conviction to stand up for something and go against the grain, go against the collective for something in your heart is true. And that's a great life lesson across the board. So back to our original question about state of politics. Don't be concerned too much about who's in office and what the state is. Let it be a reflection for you, and look at where you need to change. And when you see things in the news and in the politics you don't like, look in your own backyard. Look in your own front porch, in your own heart and soul and mind and life, and see what that is telling you about you. And find ways to continue to improve yourself, continue to become more kind, more loving, more giving, more selfless. And then you will see change will happen bigger and faster in the world. So we need to put these away, because they really don't serve a whole lot of value, or just, point them back and look at yourself. And again, realize from what I was saying earlier that there are growing pains happening right now. As the light is reclaiming dominion, there's this struggle and tug-of-war, we literally have an entire civilization and world is crumbling in front of our eyes and in our midst, while this phoenix is rising of a new consciousness, a new way of being, and they're happening at the same time. One doesn't happen and then the other one comes in its place. They're happening at the same time. So that makes for a rather painful and arduous process. So it's important to also maintain focus, maintain perspective. There's that old saying, and forgive me for butchering the words, I don't know it by heart, but the parable goes is like, I think it's about 2 wolves. One is nice and one is mean, or something like that. And which one wins, or something like that? The one you feed. So I know I butchered that beyond fairly well. I apologize. But the moral of the story is, where your consciousness goes, your consciousness grows. And if you're going to dwell on everything that's wrong, everything that's negative, that's where your consciousness will go, and that will become your life. And then you'll cry and moan about that even more, which will bring and beget more of the same. It becomes a black hole, a downward spiral that pulls you in. It doesn't mean to be Pollyanna and be all like, hearts and flowers and everything's wonderful. Everything's not wonderful. But everything is divinely in order and happening exactly as it should be. And it's important to maintain focus on who you are, who you want to be, where you want your life to go, and obviously flavored with love, kindness, respect, acceptance of others, non-judgment. Alrighty? Okie doke. I think we covered politics and a whole lot more there. Okay. Thank you for that question. Dear Louis, quite regularly, even yearly, I have found that I am replaying or reenacting a particular period of my life where I was severely traumatized. I know these feelings come up to help me heal and free myself from the hold that this event had over me, and to help me gain new wisdom and insight. Is this replaying or reenacting traumatic events something that happens to most people to help them to heal themselves? Thank you for sharing your story, and yes, I get that. And to answer the question that comes from in the heels of your story, is that something that happens to most people to help them heal themselves? This is something that happens to every single human being on the entire planet, bar none, without exception. That is, life equals initiation. And everything, the way our human psyche works and the way your soul works is the orchestrating, driving force in your life. Understand this. We are made by the Creator, whichever name you want to use for the Creator. I like the word God. Some people don't. But source, origin, Creator, whatever. We're created by God in God's image, by love, as love. We're made of unconditional love, and we're created by love, to be love, spread love. We also, point two, our body, our being, our aura is a sealed ecosystem, which means anything that happens to it, we introduced into it ourselves. Now, that sealed ecosystem is one of unconditional love. And your soul, by design, anytime you introduce non-love into that biosphere, your soul, by design, is immediately engaged in transmuting it, ejecting it, destroying it, doing whatever, because love is the only element needed for survival. I know, we need air, food, and water. That's only to sustain your physical body, which only lasts 80, 90, 100 years. Your soul is immortal and eternal, and that only needs one element for survival, and that's love. And because your soul is housed in your body, that is the most important element. And so when non-love gets introduced by you, and that's the only way it comes in, by you, whether you know that or not, conscious or unconscious, it's still you. When non-love comes in, your soul, like a machine, a whole team, is transmuting it or ejecting it or getting it out or just exterminating it, whatever, so that you can be sustained in love. So one of the vehicles that is used, we all experience certain wounds and distortions and things that happen, traumas that happen to us early on in the formative years, which is usually, most cases, conception to about the age of 10. Those are considered the formative years. And then most of the rest of your life, again, that's a rule of thumb. For some it's a little earlier, for some it's later, but as a rule of thumb, that's the formative years, conception to 10. And then the rest of your life is playing out, re-stimulating whatever wounds and damages happened in that period. And I want to underscore, it is conception, not birth, because anyone who's done past life regressions, hypnotherapy, clinical psychology knows the amount of damage that happens to people in utero is colossal, in many cases even more than what's happened in their human embodiment once they're out of the womb. And contrary to what many people falsely believe, the fetus, from the moment of conception, because once it's conceived, it has full consciousness. It hears, sees, feels, and knows every single thought, feeling, word, and action happening in its environment. Period. 24/7, waking and sleeping. 100% of every thought, feeling, word, and deed is received by the fetus and integrated and digested and taken in. So after those formative years, the rest of that life is re-stimulating some of those wounds and issues for the purpose of reflection, introspection, and to give someone, the individual, a tangible reflection of and access to whatever that was that might not have been remembered from childhood. Because as small children, in utero and out of utero, in those formative years, there's a survival mechanism that your soul takes over. And so in many cases, things go unconscious and there's no memory of them. There are vehicles to suppress, to avoid, to escape, because in order to just stay alive, to take in that much non-love and be able to stay alive, there are things that we go through. And then later in life, when we become autonomous and sovereign and have a strength of a foundation under us, these, like bath oil beads, start bursting and we start having memories, we start having awakenings to things, abuses that happen, traumas that happen. They spontaneously just open when the soul is ready to have them come up. And there are two ways that happens. Sometimes it's spontaneous, and sometimes, most of the time, your soul will deliver, the universe, your soul, God, all of the above as one, will deliver to you a situation that will re-stimulate something that needs to be healed. It'll re-stimulate it in a present time experience or circumstance, which might in no way look like what actually happened. But the energy or the wound will be exactly the same, and it'll re-stimulate that. And what happens is, because people haven't learned about the nature of psyche or soul, soul psychology or metaphysics, they project onto that and make it about that. And sadly, 99.9% of the people live their whole lives doing that, and that's victim consciousness, and it's an act of projection. Some in psychology call it transference or projection. They're pretty much the same. But it's projecting outside of self, where that has happened to show you something inside of you that's already there. What you're seeing is a re-stimulation of a pain or a wound that's already there and has been there for a very long time, most likely. So the wise soul is the one who is grateful for the situation and then goes and does the homework. What do I need to do to fix this? Where is this steering me? Where did this happen? Where is this from? And what do I need to do to fix this? Rather than attacking or blaming or continuing to live as a victim and making it about that. Because you actually created that. Your soul created that to help you get to this thing, this Chief Joseph used to call them the buried arrowheads under our flesh, where the arrow gets snapped off and then the flesh grew over it. And it's only by pressing on it that you feel it, because you walk through life and you don't see it, the flesh grew over it. It's like our shards of glass. I remember my my sister once, she had a couple of near fatal car accidents where she went through windshields. And I remember one time, like 6 months after the accident, and she had to have surgery and have her face rebuilt and all this. And I remember 6 months later, she called me in her room. She goes, "Hey, Louis, come see this." And she sat in front of her makeup mirror, and she was like going to squeeze a pimple. She said, "Watch this." First, she showed me this little bump in her face, and then she squeezed, and a clear shard of glass came out of her face that had been in there 6 months. And she said, "I get 4 or 5 of these every day." Your skin was just pushing them out. And that's how the soul works. Whatever non-love is in there, your soul is striving constantly to get it out. Spontaneous memory is one vehicle, re-stimulation through a new circumstance is another vehicle, because whatever non-love is in you, it has to get out. Same way your body will push stuff out. That's why Chief Joseph called them, some of these wounds, buried arrowheads. And he said, in the divine, your soul in its wisdom and its mastery will find just the perfect thing to touch on it to show you that it's there, because you become so adept at living your life, numbing the pain, avoiding it, escaping it, running. People who live as runaways, people who, numb themselves with drugs or sex or gambling or traveling or shopping or whatever it is to just gratify the senses and numb the pain. And then those who are lucky and wise enough to get in front of masters or divine beings or anyone who has an ability, a mastery to be able to bring them present to themselves, they'll start helping you find these buried things, these wounds, these buried arrowheads, as Chief Joseph used to call them. So, back to your original question, does this happen to most people? It happens to everyone all the time. What varies among people is who gets it, who doesn't, who continues to run and hide and numb themselves even worse, who will just spend most of their lives as victims, blaming and projecting on others. And sadly, that accounts for well over 90% of people. But the good news is that's changing. Yay! I can hardly wait. So, words to the wise. Alrighty. Thank you for that question and observation. Alrighty. Next one, the Si Van Ning. What are the Akashic records? Are they important for spiritual growth? And how may I access them? How can I access them? Akashic records I know it's a fancy word, and there's, people make more of it than it is. It is simply a word that describes the record of all that has ever happened in existence. It's not a thing. It's not a book that's stored somewhere. It just means everything that's ever happened. Are they important for spiritual growth? Not in and of themselves, no. I mean, everything's important for everything. And how can I access them? You don't need to. Your soul will use what it needs, and you'll be steered, you'll be shown. If you have past life regression, you'll have that happen. If you have a session with a master or a psychic, you'll see stuff, perhaps. And then the divine can reveal stuff to you. Your soul, God, can reveal stuff to you from within. It's sort of an immaterial question. There's nothing you need to know or do about it. No more than, what's the earth made of under my feet? I mean, there's earth under your feet, you're walking on it. There's nothing you need to do about it. It's solid ground, and unless you're on quicksand or lava, you're all good. So it's simply the record of everything that's ever happened. And it plays out in your life and gives you access to it when and where needed. Very similar question people ask me, I want to know about my past lives. Can you tell me my past lives? It's like, well, yeah, I could, but, what's the point? Your soul will draw to you whatever you need when you need it. And when people are asking me that, it is 100% of the time just the ego asking. And I'm not here to feed people's egos. There's a whole world filled with that, and we'll happily take all your money to stroke your ego all day. So, I'm here to lead people to the truth and to help them become pure love and to learn about themselves and fall in love with themselves and with God. So when people just want to see past lives for entertainment or for bragging rights or whatever, and it's kind of pointless. So when people ask me that question, I'll say, you tell me how that will bring you closer to God, and then I will answer your question. And usually that's the end of the conversation, because they were just wanting to get gossipy, chit-chatty stuff that they could brag to people about. But that's not what it's about or what it's for. And yet, at the same time, I do past life regressions all the time. And when it's an instrument to help someone heal or move through something, absolutely, I can show them things. But that's for a noble purpose. That's to help someone heal something, not to just impress you with who you were. And of course, everybody wants to be someone famous anyway. So there's a plethora of issues just in the asking of that question. Alrighty, so I threw in a bonus question on that one. I've got a few minutes left here. Let me see if I have one. Let me see here. Okay, here's one. What is the difference between Shakti and grace? Shakti, another Sanskrit word, is simply put, it's called the divine feminine principle. So it's the energy or the power and presence, the energy of God through the feminine principle. And it's a word used in Hinduism. You have Shiva and Shakti. It's the male and female. Shiva is the male aspect, the male energy of God. Shakti, the female energy. But it's the primordial life force of the universe, exemplified through the goddess, the mother of creation. Grace includes Shakti, but grace is something else. Grace is a quality, a divine quality that overlights and moves through you and moves through situations, that creates a sweetness and a beauty and an ease, and it's the indisputable presence of the divine that has befallen an individual or a situation. Whereas Shakti is a specific type of that divine energy. Okay, let me see here. I think I can get one more in here. Just being in the presence of a God-realized being is a blessing. And receiving guidance or a gift, such as prasad from a divine being, is even more of a blessing. I have felt this blessing in the changing circumstances of my life, and also as a feeling of energy in my body. Please, will you comment on this? Okay. Being in the presence of a God-realized being is a blessing. That blessing is called darshan. It's, again, a Sanskrit word. And it's a blessing that is received merely by being in the presence of an August or a saint or a holy being. And there's an energy that's transmitted that blesses your life. And yes, there's grace, the descent of grace that comes upon you by being in the presence of one such as this. And that presence can also be qualified, because some people can receive that blessing from hearing the sound of that divine being's, that God-realized being's voice, by seeing an image, a photograph, or even a painting, in a dream visitation. But by and large, most people are referring to being in that physical presence and receiving that darshan, that blessing of that one's grace. And the other thing, and you said receiving guidance or a gift, and the gift is also known by a Sanskrit word called prasad. What a lot of people don't understand about prasad is when a master, a God-realized being, touches an object, his or her entire God vibration goes into that object forever, and it's sustained in that object. So that the God vibration that dwells in the being, the personages of a God-realized being, is now infused into any object that is touched. And that energy is alive. It's a living prana, chi, life force energy that is self-replicating and emanating that God vibration all the time. That's why a lot of people, when they receive prasad, they'll often keep it on their body or in their wallet or on their altar or somewhere of them around their neck or do whatever, because that vibration is blessing you. It's bestowing grace upon you. It's protecting you. It's guiding you. It's speaking to you. It's whispering from inside of you. It's steering things in and out of your way, even if it's a tiny little crystal, or a tiny little whatever. It's carrying that vibration. Amma gives out a little Hershey's Kiss and a rose petal. So they have the rose petal for their altar, and many people will ingest that, so they take her God vibration into their cells, and other people just will never eat the Hershey's Kiss either. They'll put that on their altar. And again, there's no right or wrong. But that's the reason she imbues her energy into a food, so that people can ingest it and have her go right into their cells systemically. And that's why a lot of masters will give out prasad in the form of food, so that the people can ingest it and take that God vibration right into their cells and into their whole being and all their systems, digestive system, circulatory system, etc., respiratory system, and all your organs and all your very cells. And also that, and as I said, it continues to self-replicate and grow and bless you all the days of your life. When a God-realized being, even in their footprints remain forever, pulsing with the vibration of wherever they've stepped and anything they've ever touched. And if people just could become a little more aware of that, they wouldn't be so irreverent and offhanded with how they treat that consummate blessing that they're receiving. And unfortunately, most people don't stay present enough to that, cognizant enough about that, because most people live in a fog, live in a bit of a stupor, and have moments of coming out of it, and they kind of fall back down into it. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the great masters have always said the wise ones will, as often as they can, keep the company of saints, because you're constantly being imbued with that vibration and being refreshed and restored and being given a reflection of your true divinity just by being near them. And it keeps lifting you up, because the world living in separation has this darkness that pulls it down. It's a gravity that holds people in fear and pulls them back into it. And then you have a moment of deliverance where you're in the presence of divinity, and it pulls you out of it, and all of a sudden that's what's real. But people don't see it as that's what's real. They see it as, oh, that's something special that happened to me. My daily life is what's real. No, your daily life is a complete and total illusion, 99.99% of it, 99.99% of the time. Complete and total illusion. And that experience is what's real. And that's why the great masters have all said, keep the company of saints as often as you can, because you're being bestowed with their grace, you're being reminded and restored and remembering your true origin, your true purpose, your true destiny, your true existence as divine beings who have merely forgotten and habitually fallen into the practices of forgetfulness, of ignorance, of separateness. But those moments are what's real, and those moments are the truth of who you are and whence you came. And so by dipping the fabric of your consciousness in that truth more and more and more, what's going to happen? The die is going to eventually start to change, and more of the divinity, the white light if you want to call it, but more of the true divinity will keep impregnating you, impregnating you, impregnating you, and rinsing you. And that makes the journey faster and easier the more you do that. That's why, I tell my students and disciples, whenever a really highly evolved master is coming to town, by all means go. They say, oh, is that a conflict? Am I betraying you? I said, no, loyalty is not the same as receiving darshan. Where your heart is, you cannot serve two masters. So whoever your true master is your master. But that's separate from receiving someone's blessing. Who would not want to receive someone's blessing? I go visit other masters when they come to town. I love being drenched in that love. It's the ultimate. It's the ultimate. There's no drug on the planet that can give you that experience. There's no human touch that can give you that experience. It doesn't exist. Incomparable. So I send my students and disciples to see some of the great ones. We're lucky to have a few, and only a few, who come to this country or who are in this country. And by all means, I say go. That's separate from where your loyalty is. Your loyalty needs to only be with your guru, your true master, and your obedience and the practicing and studying of the teachings. It's really dangerous, in fact, to start window shopping and collecting. I see people who just dabble in all these different masters' teachings, and that's very, very dangerous, because you are going to find differences, and those differences will create conflicts, and then you'll be in victimhood, and you'll be projecting, and you will get confused. So find the one who resonates the most with you and stick with it. Don't go window shopping. It's not smart. You go window shopping before you choose, not after you choose. That's when loyalty and devotion and servitude is paramount. Separate discussion from having an occasion to receive someone's blessing. So, all right, and we are out of time. All right, beloveds, thank you for a lovely evening. I hope this has been helpful to you. If it has, share, spread the word. And if it hasn't, let it be our little secret. No. Thank you so much for the pleasure and privilege. I love you. I bless you. Namaste.